What is it that people are seeing? Is it a man? An animal? A myth? Or something else? Are they delusional? Are they lying? Some are pastors. Some are law enforcement. Some are military. If they are delusional liars, why do we trust them to lead us to God? To put people in jail? And to protect our way of life? Why are their words and actions good enough for that? But when it comes to experiencing something out of the ordinary, something fascinating, something possibly terrifying, they become a fool, a joke, an idiot. Not here. We are the Big Dog T2B. Welcome to the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when we have new content published. Tonight's episode is part 2 of Storytime with Coonbo. We hope you enjoy the show.
Just turned around and looked at him again, and he said as it turned back around, he could see through the transparency of his hair the partial bone structure of the thing. And he said it looked at him for a few seconds and growled at him again, and he said it turned back around and goes walking away, and he said the thing just faded out. He said it did not walk into the woods. He said it was walking in the clear down this old roadbed. And he said by the time it got 100 feet away from him, he said it had just faded away. And he had not told anybody about that until he told me about it the other day. He had told me that he had something he was wanting to talk to me about, but he had been trying to get his courage up to talk to another researcher about it. And he had even mentioned it to Nathan, that he had something he was wanting to talk about. But he asked me if I had ever seen anything like that. And I said, no. I said I had seen them with extremely shiny hair, that the hair sort of shimmered, but almost like it was waxed or polished or something. I mean, that's the thing. I've told people that the ones on our farm always look like they just came from the beauty parlor, like they've just had their hair done or something, and it's their hair is real shiny. But I've never seen one that shimmered like that I couldn't focus my eyes on. However, I had an incident happen back in the late 1980s where I saw one run into a thicket right off of a cutover area that was one of these thickets like this that was impenetrable briars and such. It's an area that I knew very well and had deer hunted in that area since back when I was about 15 years old. And I saw one run full speed into this thicket. And it was like what that police officer had described. It didn't move a leaf. It didn't make any wake through it. It didn't knock anything down. It left no path, no trail through there. And it completely blew my mind. And I wasn't the only one that saw it. And I had an incident with another researcher that's passed away now down in Mississippi where we had 3 come out of an impenetrable thicket and just walked out right there in front of us. And these were 30 to 35 feet away from us. And we didn't hear them coming. Couldn't see how they got out of there. The wind wasn't blowing. It was a still, muggy day. And none of that vegetation even twitched when the 3 of them came out of it. and this was cut over area. So I have seen what the police officer saw 2 times in my research, and I have not told, until now, I have not told people about it. And this is one of those things that I can't explain, Tal can't explain. I don't know what to think of it. I've not ever shared this thing. But based on what Tal has told me and a couple of things that I have observed and what the police officer saw, just makes me wonder, that some of this stuff that we may have written off as hoax bears some further investigation. Okay, so we've got 2 things that have happened on this piece of property. We've got the landowner, the police officer, seeing 2 very large Bigfoot that his words were they dissolved into this thicket, this impenetrable thicket. And then Tal himself having an encounter with a juvenile Bigfoot that was covered with almost like shimmering, reflective, almost mirrored hair that he'd hardly get his eyes to focus on it, that literally walked away from him and faded out as it went away from him. Right there next to the thicket, that same thicket. The 2 places that I saw Bigfoot, I had never thought of the word dissolved, but I guess that's a pretty good descriptive term, that they ran wide open into this impenetrable cutover and disappeared into it and never disturbed a leaf, never left a track, never moved anything. So I have seen that, but I guess dissolved is a pretty good descriptive word. But it's one of those things that I've always kept close to my chest and not talked about.
There's a lot to be said about the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is camouflage in the way that we use it.
Right.
So old World War stuff, it was a relatively neutral color in the environment.
Right.
And we thought that we'd be kind of hard to see. And we went from there to a woodland camo. And that woodland camo was a 3 basic color camo. It was a black, a green, and a brown. And it had a mottled pattern to it, but it was a distinctive line in the color change. And we went from there to different flavors of jungle camo and tiger stripe camo. And all of that still had a definite color change to it. This color here, this color here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of all that, we had the development of ghillie suits. So it's not really the color of a ghillie suit that makes the ghillie suit effective. It's that a ghillie suit destroys the outline because light from behind the ghillie suit can be seen through the outer edges, and because of that outer edge not being definite, that makes it harder to pull an image the way that we recognize it out of that, right? It's not the color of the ghillie suit that does that, it's the ability of light to move through it. And then we went from there into digital camo patterns. In digital camo patterns, when you're 10, 15 feet from them, they're not very effective. But those little squares don't make a line in the colors at a distance. It makes a fade in between the colors, and it makes the colors less distinct, right? It's a gradation instead of absolutes.
You put on a set of ACUs and go out in sagebrush flats and prairie areas, or the places that you hunt antelope out in Wyoming, and you just go out there and sit down up against something or sit out in the sage, you just melt into it. I like to antelope hunt, and I've got a friend that always wears ACUs when we go antelope hunting. He can walk out there and just stop, stand still, or if he can get in there where the sage is a little bit high or up against some rocks or something and just stop and you can't see him. It's unbelievable how it blends in.
It's those non-distinct lines.
Right.
The brain works really well like a piece of graph paper, right? You've got
Mm-hmm.
vertical flora, you've got horizontal for most of fauna. In picking those lines
Mm-hmm.
out against each other, you can set your mind for a flash photography that says if I see something that's horizontal X amount above ground level, that's probably the back of an animal, and I can key on that.
Yeah. You read any book about how to spot deer, how to spot elk in the woods. They tell you look for horizontal lines.
And these things make that more difficult. They're in line with the base of the flora. And if they are fuzzy, if they have hair and not so much fur, so that that's not a distinct outline,
Mm-hmm.
and if they're oily,
Mm-hmm.
we're oily, we just bathe a lot. Everything else,
Right.
to some extent, has a shine to their fur. And I'm not taking away from anything that's said, but in natural terms, in natural environment, now, not moving anything, yeah, that's out there. That's a different ability. And
Mm-hmm.
I was with Nathan down in Alabama, and we went into one of his places down there. We're on probably 15-degree grade, and 3 distinct impressions.
Mm-hmm.
Can't see toes, but something heavy, something alternating slightly on the side of a hill,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. There are no
Mm-hmm.
rocks to step on. There are no limbs to step on. Trees there weren't big enough to get something up off the ground. If you want to take 3 running steps
Mm-hmm.
and lunge tree to tree, pull the Tarzan thing, there was just nothing in that environment like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't deny Nate's a pretty sizable guy.
Mm-hmm.
His feet were not making an impression in this ground.
Right.
These were impressions where they had a hard enough edge that it broke leaves in the process. Now, there's nothing that rolled down that hill. There was nothing downhill from
Right.
it. There were 3 impressions there, and poof, nothing. Not that we saw anything. Not that it couldn't be something else. But that type of report,
Yep.
finding 1, 2, 3 prints or following a trackway into the middle of a field and it just disappearing, if you're a good tracker, you can spot a print that's been stepped in twice.
Exactly.
Not that everybody's a good tracker. And
Right.
you can go back. This one's got a side squash in it. I'm going to go look in the opposite direction of that squash in the print and see if it backstepped and stepped off, right? Man tracking instead of animal tracking.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things like that. You have these things you can't explain. Experienced guy, not just experienced hunter,
Right.
not just experienced technology, not just experienced traveled, but experienced particularly with these things. And you have this stuff that you go, yeah, you got me. And when you get people talking, and if they'll trust you enough to say it, almost everybody has multiples of that story.
One of the crazy things that I've come across numbers of times is finding one track, one single perfect good track out in the middle of freaking nowhere. And the terrain and ground around it should have had other tracks. How do you get one track out there? Does this Bigfoot slide down a rope off the bottom of a Black Hawk helicopter and stomp that 1 foot down and then they pull him back up? I mean, how does that happen? In 2016, I was elk hunting out on the east face of Hoback Peak to the west of the Grove Hunt. Anyway, and I'm up there, and we've been up this Forest Service trail. It's a blazed trail. I got topo maps there. It goes all the way back in the 1920s, and these trails show up there. They reblaze the trails periodically because this is national forest land. But it's in a hunting concession that belongs to a particular guide service that pays for the concession. So there's no other hunters in there. And I'm in there the first hunt of the season. This is a half a day's horse ride back to the base camp, and then another hour or so's or two's ride beyond that up the side of the east slope of Hoback Peak. Freaking middle of nowhere. And we've been back in there a couple of times already. And we ride as far as we can until it gets too steep and rough for the horses. And so we tie the horses up and then go on foot. And I'm walking up through there on this road, this trail that I've been on 2 previous times. And this is where it's cutting along the edge of a natural meadow up on the side of the mountain. You know, I'm 20 feet, 25 feet or so out from the tree line on this trail. I look down, there's about a 17, 18 inch Bigfoot track right there in the middle of the trail. A perfect track. And it's mashed down in the ground. It's 3 inches down in the dirt. And I stomp as hard as I can, and I can't even get 3/4 of an inch with my, size 13 boot. And the guide comes up, and I'm standing there looking at it, and all he says is, "Yep," and keeps right on going. I never could get him to talk about it, but a couple of days later, we had an incident where we actually clearly heard just terrifically good vocalizations. There was a wallow on the edge of one of these parks, and there were mule deer and elk out there, and even moose. And these vocalizations started up pretty dadgum close to us. And when they started, the deer, the elk, and the moose all opened up a large can of gone and got the hell out of there immediately. And the bad part about it is I didn't have a moose tag. One of the moose that was there was a booner. I mean, he's record book moose. Of course, I didn't have a moose tag. The deer that were there were all dinks. I had a mule deer tag. And there was a really, really nice bull elk that was slowly working towards me. And when they all bolted and hauled ass, he stayed in the timber, and all I got was just glimpses of him in that super fast trot that they do. So I never got a shot. Now, they had gone through all the trouble to carry a ladder stand back in there, and I was actually up in a ladder stand. Interesting thing, when we came back to the ladder stand later, it was torn apart. And the guide says, "Oh, I guess a bear tore it up." Well, there weren't any bear tracks around there. and there were no scratches. I've seen a lot of stuff torn up by bears. There was no evidence of that a bear had touched that thing. Also, a bear wouldn't rip the safety bar off and all that kind of stuff, sling it halfway across the damn meadow, halfway across the park.
I don't even think I've told Nate about this one. We moved into this place the Thanksgiving, Christmas of 2016, and I can't tell you how many times I've had things thrown at me, and we're in the middle of 61 acres. Nate's visited. He says all the time about how remote this place is. But this place was built in 1900. You go down the basement, you can see the draw knife marks on the timbers. And across the road there's a big field, and they look like they had some concrete that was probably just left over from pour, and started pouring it out there to make a little driveway into that field across the road. And over the years, it's done the typical thing of wash a little dirt over it, and lichen grows and dies, and wash a little dirt over that. I think it was after Maryland hunting season in 2018, I found one track, and I've never seen one. I haven't seen it to my distinction of seeing one. When I can see it move, I can see it breathe, I can see it blink, I can see it operate, and I can say, yep, that is what that is right there. I haven't had that happen. But this track was the size, if you were to put your finger on your wrist at the base of your hand, about not the end of your palm, but that next knuckle on your middle finger is about the size of that track. It was hard enough, and it was a right-footed track, and it was wheeling to the left. It was hard enough that it ground out and smudged that dirt and lichen to the point that you could tell absolutely that it had wheeled to the left. It was in a hurry. Now, that concrete over there is not a smooth pour. It's a bunch of rocks and gravel. And I know that if I had done that with my foot, because I stepped in beside it and did the same thing with my boot on and looking at the gravel that was in the track, that would have tore the hide off me. But here's this track. I can make out 4 toes on it. I can make a clear heel and one track. When that left foot hit the ground, it had to be off balance enough that it would have made another track. It was wheeling too hard. If this was a kid, one, what are they doing out there January, February in Maryland barefoot, deciding it's a good idea that they need to get out of Dodge through sawbriars, like you say, just plain take the hide off it. You are not at that height going to get through there and dive through some kind of hole and do it. So it's the same kind of thing where I have this plethora of things. I can't explain what did that, why that happened, why it is just this and nothing else.
Yeah. If you've been doing this for very long and you've been out there in the right kind of place, a large number of researchers have had this happen to them. You'll be out there, and I'll tell you 2 of mine so you'll get an idea. And when I very first moved up here to Missouri from Mississippi in 2002, winter of 02-03, I was researching down in the old Momo area where all the original Momo sightings occurred, down around Louisiana, Missouri, and the area north of there towards, there's a town, that little community down there, Ashland or Asheville or Ashdown or something like that, Ash something. And also around near where the Salt River dumps into the Mississippi River. And I researched up in that area, and yes, there are still boogers there. I still go back there. Anyway, I was in this one particular area that had had a number of sightings even up till recently. I had my dog Bo with me, my German Shepherd Bo, and I had my female Alaskan Malamute Niffy with me. And this was in the wintertime, and there was about 4 to 6 inches of snow on the ground. There were a lot of sightings along this particular stretch of the Salt River. And so I was trying to come in from the backside into the area where these sightings had occurred. And I had to walk a railroad track for a ways. And I had my 2 dogs with me. I got into the area where I was wanting to be, and we're easing along. And along the river, it had been logged at one time, not in the too distant past, and this is just flat ground, and whoever had done it didn't maintain a riparian perimeter like they're supposed to. There was a strip of about anywhere from 30 to 60 yards of just saplings and stuff growing up. And they weren't real dense at that time. You could walk through them easily. Well, there was a couple of old raggedy looking trees that would be, a foot to 18 inches in diameter, but they were very few and far between. The rest of it was grown up in saplings that were anywhere from 1 inch to 2.5 inches in diameter. And you could easily walk through there. So you could see a pretty good distance. And again, snow on the ground. So I'm thinking, man, if there's boogers in there, red, black, brown, whatever, even tan colored, they'll stand out like a sore thumb. I'll be able to see them really easy. Or, coyotes or whatever I run into, deer, I'll be able to see anything that's in there. So we're going through there, and first thing I noticed was that Bo and Niffy were sticking pretty close to me. I didn't have them on leashes or anything. And some of you that will listen to this that have been out with me with those 2 dogs will know that especially Niffy likes to circle around and run a pretty wide area, and Bo also would get out of sight of me, but would check back in often. and he didn't run as far as Niffy. But both of them were staying pretty close to me. We get back in there, oh, 300-400 yards off the railroad bed, walking along parallel to the river. And like I said, I can see through those saplings. I can easily see 40, 50 yards ahead of me. And all of a sudden, Bo and Niffy just stop. They're in front of me. Both of them stop. It's dead in their tracks. Bo's hackles go up, and Niffy, if anybody's ever seen an Alaskan Malamute go on full alert, their hair stands up on their back all the way down to the base of their tail. It even puffs out some on the sides. It's almost like they puff up like a cat. All of Bo's hackles stood up, and he wasn't stopped more than a second and a half, just long enough for his hackles to go up, and he whirled around and he hauled ass out of there to the truck. I mean, he opened up an extra large super jumbo size instantaneous acting can of gone. And Niffy starts backing up. She never looks away from what they were looking at. She was looking at about a 11 o'clock angle, just slightly off of straight ahead off of our direction of travel. And she starts backing up, and she backs up against my shins and everything, and she just keeps pushing. I think she was intending to want me to push me back. And I ended up, she sort of squeezed up in between my legs, and I ended up just standing there almost astraddle of her like I was going to ride her, which she weighed 124 pounds, so I nearly could have ridden her. And so I fussed at her a little bit, and I backed off, but she was just glued to something out there. And I even sort of squatted down and looked across between her ears and across over her nose, almost like using her ears and her nose as a gun sight to see exactly where she was looking. And I could see a long way on the angle that she was looking, and I could see 70, 80 yards through there. And the woods were totally dead quiet. And again, 4 to 6 inches of snow on the ground. And I'm thinking, whatever's out there, I should be able to see it. And I have a pair of binoculars around my neck. I picked my binoculars up, and I'm looking right out there where she's looking. And I never did spot anything out there. But Niffy kept getting more and more upset. She never growled or anything, but I heard her make a really, really low, quiet little whine, a little pitiful whine. She was wanting out of there. She wasn't going to abandon me. I wanted to move forward. I started to move forward, and something kept me. I knew it suddenly hit me. If I walked another 1 or 2 steps forward, I wasn't going to make it out of there. There was something out there that meant to kill me if I came any closer. I realized that I was in extreme danger, and I could not lift one foot up to put it down in front of the other one. It was such a horrendous premonition, I guess you'd say. And so I started backing up, and Niffy started backing up. She never turned. She never turned away. She kept backing up, and she would back up till she bumped into me. I'd have to look behind me to make sure I didn't trip over something. But we backed out of there probably 50, 60 yards at an angle where we could get out into the field. There was an agricultural field out there. It was, frozen over, of course, covered with snow and everything. And we backed out at an angle and got out into that field. We got out in the field a good 50, 60 yards. So there was a good clear buffer zone between us and that strip of saplings along the riverbank. Once we were in the clear, we turned, got out of there as quick as we could go without running. Both of us kept glancing back to see if anything was following us. But I'm telling you what, we got there and Bo was up in the bed of the truck up on top of the toolbox, and was he ever glad to see us. And we got the hell out of Dodge. But now that happened there near the mouth of the Salt River. And down in Mississippi, there's a lot of places in Mississippi where there's Indian mounds. And I heard about this set of mounds that I was wanting to go to. And this is not the ones that y'all have heard me tell a lot of stories about where we've had a lot of encounters there. This is another set of mounds, further south down in Mississippi. So I decided to go down there one weekend. I don't know why I didn't take Niffy with me. I don't know if I left her in Alabama so the kids could play with her or what. For some reason, I didn't take Niffy. I took just Bo. And I drove down to these mounds, and they're in a park area. There's park police and rangers and stuff like that there. And so I get down there at about, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I drive in there, and there, there's a nice picnic area there and everything. I drive up here, and there's not a soul there. Nobody. I'm the only one there. Only vehicle. I thought, well, that's weird. There where the mound, the park's a lot bigger, but there where the mounds are, it's in a separate area. I thought, well, that's weird that there's nobody in here, because it's a really nice park. There's you got a pretty good sized parking lot there, and then you come out of the parking lot, there's a really nice paved walking path, and there's kiosks along the walking path periodically, about 3 or 4 of them. That's got a lot of good pictures and stuff in it, and shows the layout of the area, things they've found where an Indian village was, and all this kind of stuff. And so I was really interested in those kiosks, and I had been through all of them, and then had come out of the last one, and you had to walk about 75 feet or so till you got to this one mound. It had one of these decorative log fences around it, probably, I don't know, 100 feet back from it, or 75 to 100 feet back away from the base of the mound, all the way around it, the first one that you came to. And that's the only one that they'd actually let you go in there and walk up on it and stuff like that. The rest of them, they didn't want you on them. And so there's a little passageway, about, it's not but maybe 2 feet wide or so, that's where the asphalt walking trail goes through there, so that people can't drive in there with 4-wheelers or something like that. I imagine now they probably had to widen it to make it handicapped accessible, because a wheelchair couldn't have fit through it at the time I was there. So I'm walking through there, and I get about 20 feet from that, where you go through the log fence, and boom, all of a sudden, I was hit by that sick, sweet, almost gut-wrenching smell. Not the really bad stench that they emit sometimes, but it's their breath. It's a sick, sweet smell. And sometimes it'll smell like rotten fermented fruit or rotten fermented flowers or something, or sometimes like a mixture of rotten apples and cat pee or something.
Like silage.
Yes, like silage. Yes.
Yeah.
Or like mash from a moonshine still, sort of. Where your mash is working on.
Mm-hmm.
When you're making wine, the smell of what bubbles out of your wine jug when you're letting it work off. But it's a sick, sweet smell.
Mm-hmm.
And when you smell that, you're right on top of that booger. You're less than 50 feet of it, and usually you're within less than 30 feet of it. And it hit me, and it hit Bo at the same time. He never hesitated. He whirled and ran to the truck. I stopped dead in my tracks right there on that little walking path, and there was a slight breeze blowing from the south. To the south, there was machine-planted pines down through there, and they were planted on about a 5 to 6 foot square grid. And those pines they were only like maybe 8-9 feet tall, so they were only at the base only 3.5 inches in diameter. So you could look right through them. I mean, you could look through there just easy as pie. And I whooped my head around, and because the smell was coming out of those pines, and there was just, like I said, the slightest little zephyr of a breeze. And I stood there for 5 or 6 minutes looking into those pines, trying to see that booger that I knew was there. And I even thought I heard breathing a time or two. It was so close. And then the next thing, I'd been there a minimum of 5 minutes. I might have been there 10 minutes. I was just standing still, just looking, not moving my head, but just moving my eyes, just searching up and down the side of every one of those little pines and looking back down through there, through the rows of them and stuff, trying to see anything, even the tiniest little thing out of place. And I became aware of a car flying down the road, the park road, right outside this little picnic area. And I'm thinking, man, those park police will bust your butt driving like that. I mean, this car sounded like it's doing 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, it slammed on the brakes. And remember now, this is in the days before anti-lock brakes. It slams on the brakes. They didn't lock the tires up completely, but they were just beginning to go sort of, just barely beginning to chirp some. And the car whooped up into the park area, and I said, damn, somebody must be hungry or got to go to the bathroom, because there's a little bathroom there, one of those little vault toilets. And what whooped up in there was a dadgum park police car. And the guy got on his PA, and he says, we're closing this area down. You got to leave the area immediately. I just looked at him, and I looked back around. I wanted to look back around and see if the disturbance had made something move. And he hollered at me again, and I was still trying to look back up there. Next thing I know, I heard the door slam, and I looked around. Here he comes. He wasn't running, but he was sort of like a slow jog coming towards me. And he's got his damn heel of his palm on the handle of his pistol. And I said, well, I better get my butt moving. And so I turned around and headed towards him. He said, what are you doing? I said, I just pulled up here and walked down the path there and went through the kiosk. I was walking over there to the mound. I was going to go over and look at the Indian mound. And he says, you got to leave here immediately. I says, why? He says, if you say one more word, I'm going to slap you in cuffs. I'm going to cite you for interfering, for disobeying a duly appointed law officer or some kind of crap like that. He cited some kind of thing. And I'm hauling you out of here in handcuffs. All right, okay, I'm leaving. And so I get in the truck, and again, Bo's up in the back of the truck standing on the toolbox, like, damn it, Daddy, get your ass in the truck. We gotta go, and excuse me for cussing, I'm sorry. As soon as I open the truck door, he piles off and beats me into the truck. So I cranked up my left out of there, and I went out the gate of the little picnic area deal, and I went back up the road just a little piece, and I pulled over just to see what that guy would do. And sure enough, here he came out, and he stopped, and he closed the gate and locked it, padlocked it. So I said, well, shoot, I better not be sitting here. I put her in gear and got on up the road. Well, I was plumb out of that area. And he comes up behind me and follows me to within 2 miles of my home. He followed me for a freaking hour. And I hadn't figured that one out yet. For one, how did they know I was in there? 2, what in the hell were they doing closing the park? What had I stumbled into? And 3, why the hell would he follow me? If he'd have run my tag number, he'd have known that I'd already been in trouble with the park police on the Natchez Trace. They'd already run me out of there when I discovered how the boogers were getting back and forth across the trace without being seen. And that's when I got threatened to lose my job. He obviously knew who I was. And I still, to this day, I have no idea what I had gotten myself into. But again, it's another example of I knew one was there. I knew it was close, but I could not see it. And it could not have been up in the trees or laying on the ground or anything. And it couldn't have hidden itself in behind those little 2.5-inch diameter tree trunks. But there's something else going on there that kept me from being able to see it. So I wanted to hear Troy's take on this before my buddy Troy Allen before I got on here and started talking about this. And so he just happened to call me yesterday evening, checking on me and my broke leg. I knew that Troy had told me a few things similar to this, things like this happening to him. I cited a couple of stories that he had told me, and I said, other than those, I said, have you had really weird things like this happen to you? He said, oh yeah. He said, I've got a few that I haven't told anybody. And he told me one of them. And it was pretty crazy, but I'd had a similar thing happen to me. And in fact, I've heard quite a number of people describe what he described in great detail.
I'll tell you one that happened to me here that
Yeah.
I don't think I've told anybody about.
Mm-hmm.
I raise Labradors, and
Mm-hmm.
we had some folks come over, and we have an interview process and an application process for the dogs, and
Mm-hmm.
there was just something not right about these folks.
Mm-hmm.
And when they left, they backed out. They don't know where I'm talking about. They backed out with the back end of their car toward the stop sign that's about 200 yards away. And when they pulled off, probably about 100 feet from where they stopped and finally put it in drive, they made it about 100 feet, and a tree came down right behind them.
Wow.
Across the road.
Uh-huh.
And I've had 3 trees fall, pushed down around this place. But it fell out across the road, and I was watching them leave because they were kind of odd anyway. And when the tree fell, I opened the door, and I told my wife to hand me my pistol. It was right at twilight. It was hard grayscale.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked down there, and I'm just going to pull this tree out of the road so the cars don't hit it. And I made it within about 50 feet of that tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't spook easy. Not even a little bit. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden on the opposite side of the road, I popped to a low ready, and every hair on my body stood on end, and I am a hairy guy. It's a running joke for me in a doctor's office that I don't want to end up on YouTube as a Bigfoot sighting in their office.
Sounds like my son.
There's a great silverback gorilla at least somewhere in my family tree.
Yeah.
I popped to a low ready, and everything about it, I just bristled.
Uh-huh.
I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. And I worked my way down to that tree, and it was a sizable tree. There's a decent amount of blight here. It was a sizable tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a hold of that tree, and I worked my way farther from the house, pulling that tree out of that road. And I backed up all the way to the house.
Mm-hmm.
And no reason at all. Like I said, there was not a sight, there was not a sound, there wasn't a smell.
Mm-hmm.
But
yep,
all at once, there was something in front of me that was coming for me.
That's just the way I felt down on the Salt River. If I had taken one more step, it was coming after me. Is that how you felt? If you'd have gone any further, it was coming after you?
Yep, skin's drawn up on me right now.
Yeah. I got chili bumps, or as our northern friends say, goose bumps or goose pimples, standing up all over up and down my leg about this.
That night that me and Kathy was across the road, that thermal that I took that you said was within 10 feet, that night, I had very much the same feeling. We walked into the woods. I know I've told this several times, so I'll condense it pretty good. But we got into the woods probably maybe 200 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard what sounded like a tree fall down below the pond. And I just got this feeling of dread.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she'd never heard this sense of urgency in my voice. I told her, I said, we need to move out of here. We need to move out of here now. So we turned around. There was 2 sounds. When we turned around, it was to our right. At first, it was to our left.
Mm-hmm.
And they shadowed us all the way back out of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
She almost broke and run. I told her, don't you run. And it was just a feeling of like, we've got to go right now. So we walked out of the woods. Just as soon as we got out of the woods, it's the loudest tree knock I've ever heard. Sounded like a rifle shot, like something in frustration. I turned around, I snapped a picture with a thermal. And it was there, quartering away from me. Jack, and he's great with pictures and whatnot. He estimates it was less than 10 feet from me. It was they were that close when we come out of the woods. And all I had, this is what made me buy my 300 blackout, because I had a 12 gauge pump, and I knew if those two that we heard rushed us, I couldn't get but at best one shot off, and I could not protect my wife.
Yeah.
So I bought me something that I could put some lead down range. And that's the only time that I've ever had that sense of dread to that degree. Because I ain't got a nervous bone in my body. I was off that bridge and under that bridge just that quick. We come to see a booger. If there's a booger on the bridge, I'm going to look at him. But that night I couldn't stay there. And that's something I don't like to admit, but I couldn't have stayed there. I had to go.
What's crazy is you have these situations, then you have like what happened when me and Jimmy and Dave and a bunch of us were out there in Oklahoma last year. We were riding around out there in the middle of freaking nowhere and down there along the Red River. We found a place where they'd been working on the road and widened the road out a little bit. I said, this would be a good place to stop and call. And so I just stopped the truck, and the two trucks pulled up, and we got out, and I shut the engine off. I walked around, and it was cloudy, overcast, and no moon. It was black, pitch dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Literally, I could not see anything. If I'd have stepped 2 steps away from the truck and you'd spun me around, I'd have never been able to find the truck again. It was that dark. And I'm standing there, and I leaned up against the front of the truck. Other people, they were getting out. And we were all being real quiet. Nobody turned on any lights or anything. And I thought, dadgummit, I left my thermal laying there on the console of the truck. So I walked back there and found the door handle, opened the truck up, got the thermal out, turned it on. And it takes about 15 seconds or so, maybe 20 seconds for the thing to boot up and be ready to go. And so I turned it on as I went walking back to the front of the truck. When I got to the front of the truck, I was wondering, well, is it on or not? Is it booted up yet? And I raised it up, and everything was just bright in through the imager, through the eyepiece. And I lowered it back down, and I raised it up again, and suddenly I realized there was a booger standing, and I mean a begging. I'm talking about a 10-footer, type 1, standing right in front of me. So close it took up the whole field of view of the thermal. And I started moving it around, and I could pick out its outline. And I'm like, look, you can ask Jimmy. Look at that, look right here, look. And of course, nobody could see knew where I was, but they heard my voice. And 2 or 3 others had their thermals on, and they saw it, and it stepped out of the woods on the right side of the road. It was just standing still when I first saw it, and it just walked out of the wood. It was standing right on the edge of the tree line, right on the side of the road. It walked across the road right in front of me, and there was about a 2-foot diameter tree right there on the shoulder of the left side of the road. It walked in behind that tree. It was so funny. It sort of leaned and looked out around the left-hand side of the tree, and this big old butt was hanging out of the right-hand side of the tree. I mean, it wasn't even close to being concealed. And by this time, half of us could clearly see it, through our thermals. And I think somebody even had an old-fashioned starlight scope and had their IR illuminator on and could see it. It sat there and looked at us for a minute, leaning around that tree looking at us, and I don't know, for maybe 10 seconds or so. And then it just turned and just ambled off back through the woods. Like it didn't have a care in the world. It walked out there about 30 yards and then stopped and turned around and stood there and looked at us. And then we noticed there were 3 more out in the road down, I don't know, probably 75, 80 yards down the road. There were 3 of them standing out there in the road looking at us. 3 or 4 guys took off down there going towards them. I went and grabbed my shotgun and sort of, and as they were walking up the road, and I was sort of easing along behind them, and a dadgum hog staggered out into the road and was staggering around. and figured out what we done. We interrupted a hog hunt. They'd already bopped that hog in the head or slammed him up against something, but it was all addled. And I was afraid it was fixing to get after somebody, so I ran to the truck and grabbed my shotgun, and I this is crazy as I'll get out. I tried to hold my thermal up there and look at it, hold it against the barrel of my shotgun and look and aim, and I realized that wasn't working. I said, screw it, and I got a flashlight there that clips on it, and I just turned the flashlight on and lit the hog up, and I kept the shotgun on the hog, and it just staggered around out there in the road, and it ambled off in the woods, sort of in the direction that the big booger went. But in the meantime, the other guys had gotten down there where the other three boogers were standing in the road, and they walked back in the brush and disappeared. And they stood around, shined around, looked for them and everything for a bit, and they came back. And by the time they got back to the truck, one of them was standing back out there in the road again. But anyway, but the thing about it is, during all this, I never felt the tiniest bit of fear. I never felt that we were in any kind of danger at all. The only danger I felt was that hog, because it was about 150, 200 pound hog. That was the only thing that I was worried about, and it was so addled, it didn't know what was going on. It didn't even know we were there. It never even acknowledged our presence.
You know, what was creepy about that night, and it goes back to a whole lot of what you're saying. At that time, we had and still have the type 1s off in Newsom Sinks here, and they never have ever made me feel in any way threatened whatsoever. These across the road had a very baboonish looking face.
Yeah.
They had a muzzle, they had canines, and a very baboonish looking face. And they are the only ones that I've ever got that feeling of dread from. The type 1s in Newsom Sinks, they come out and watch us, shoot me and Kathy, rode right by one, squatted down beside the trail on a four-wheeler. It could have reached out and touched us. And they have never made me feel in any way like I was in any kind of danger.
Mm-hmm.
But these that were across the road, they'd give you the willies now.
Yeah. Now,
I don't know if it's the difference in the type.
Since you mentioned that, Tal and I talked about this, and Troy and I talked about it, and first time I ever heard of one of these, what I call a type 3, it's the baboon-headed ones.
Mm-hmm.
And they got big canines, upper and lower, and there are some people call them the snouted ones.
Mm-hmm.
They are a primate. They're a hominid. They're a primate. They have plantigrade feet, which means that when they walk, their heel touches the ground, just like ours, and just like a normal, type 1 Bigfoot, just like a type 2 Bigfoot. They leave a full track imprint when they're walking upright bipedally, but they are something different. I don't know if they're an offshoot, a separate sort of a little species, like the difference between a chimpanzee and a bonobo. Chimpanzee and bonobo look about the same, but there's very slight differences between them. The bonobo's a little bit bigger, and they haven't been recognized as a separate species for very long. These type 3s, they got the same body and everything of a type 2, but they got this doggish, canine-ish looking, baboonish looking head with very distinct upper and lower canines. And every person who's encountered those things that I've interviewed, I've talked to people that have described these particular type of Bigfoot all the way back into the 90s. All of them say they have a very evil, foreboding feeling when you're around those things. And a lot of people say that they're absolutely evil. I've encountered them. The very first time that I became aware of them was down in Louisiana. There was a bunch of three-toed tracks down there. In fact, the very first three-toed tracks I ever saw was Jim Lansdale with the GCBRO sent me a picture of some. And won't know if I'd ever seen anything like that before. And I hadn't at the time. I had not. I told him so, and I thought maybe they were emu tracks or something. The emu craze had ended not long before this, and a lot of people just turned them loose. In The very first pictures I saw of them didn't have anything for scale with them. Later on, he came up with some for scale, and I'm like, ooh, ain't no emu. I don't know what that thing is. And I was thinking, three-toed tracks down in the swamp. What do we got? Some kind of velociraptor or allosaurus or I knew it wasn't a velociraptor. They were too big and heavy for that, I thought, but I didn't know what in the hell
These over here were five-toe tracks.
But we've run into these things, and I have seen some of them, a lot of them that were five-toed, but there are a surprising number of these type 3s. This is the same thing that you can get online and look up the Beast of Seven Chutes. You can see what I'm talking about, the Beast of Seven Chutes. Seven Chutes is a park up in Quebec, Canada. There are some pretty good pictures of it online you can find. That's a type 3 Bigfoot or booger. I don't know if they're a genetic defect or some kind of a result of inbreeding or something. I don't know what these things are. But everywhere that these things show up, the resident type 1s and type 2s leave. They pack up and leave, and they get out of there. I've seen this happen down at a particular place down on the Louisiana-Texas border near Lake of the Pines. I've seen this happen up here in Iowa at a particular place in southeast Iowa, and a place that I had been researching since back in 2002. And these things have moved in, and all the other Bigfoot are gone. And there were Bigfoot in there that a family had been habituating for generations back into the 1800s. And they had all of them named and everything. I mean, I've actually been in contact with these people for over 20 years. And they have a granddaughter that they say I've seen her do it. She talks to them. And she understands them, or she acts like she does. But their granddaughter came in there one day all upset and crying and told her grandma that the matriarch of that troop of Bigfoot had told her that the bad ones had come and they were going to have to leave. And she was all upset because they were leaving, and they did. They disappeared. The grandma told me that she was sitting on her back deck, and she always made, about 9 o'clock in the morning, she would always make a bunch of pancakes and carry out there on the deck for them, and they'd come up there and she'd feed them off the deck. And she was sitting there, and she'd in the chair, and she was just hoping that they might show back up. And she'd brought some pancakes out, and she looked up, and there on the trail out of the woods that they always came and went on, she said thought she saw one of them coming, and as it got closer, she realized that wasn't any of her regular ones. She said it had this baboon-looking head on it, and she said she was instantly felt just an oppressive, evil presence. And she said it came up and it walked up to the side of her deck and said she was scared to move. She didn't know what to do. And said it just stood there and said it glowered at her. And it reached up there and got a pancake or two, ate them, and it stood there and stared at her as it was eating, and then it just turned around and walked off. And she said she and her husband started doing a bunch of stuff. She actually called me and wanted to know how to get rid of them. And for a long time, she wouldn't tell me why suddenly they wanted to get rid of them. I thought she was wanting to get rid of the one that I had been warning her about habituating those things. I thought she was trying to get rid of the ones that they'd been habituating for generations. So I told her the usual things to do. Well, the next I heard from her, her husband had died of a heart attack. And then about 2 months after that, she called me and she had moved. And she said once her husband died, she said these things were coming up there and trying to get in her house. And she said one night they tore through the wall of her basement, got in her basement, and were beating on the floor. And she ran out and jumped in her car and left and never came back. And the house is sitting there to this day with all of her stuff still in it. She gave me the key to the house. I've been in there and offered to go get it, bring her stuff. She said, no, 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 I don't want any of that stuff, And she took a few things with her, but the house is still sitting there empty. And when I went in the house, they had broken up through the floor and gotten up into the thing, torn up a bunch of stuff. But these things, they're evil. Now, just in the last week, they've shown up at another place where a friend of mine lives just south of here.
We like to keep things to about an hour, and this looks like a good stopping point. Please join us for part 3 of Storytime with Coonbo. Please keep in mind that if you decide to step off the pavement, if you decide to step off the trail, and get back into places where people normally don't go, you need to be mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for what you may encounter. Take care. God bless. We love you. And until next time, have a good evening.